They say you can tell everything about a man by the enemies he makes. But what if one of those men actually kept a list and promised a manhunt against them? When footage appeared online of a nominee for the nation's top law enforcement job reposting a clip of himself wielding a chainsaw against his so-called political foes, the room went silent. Not a movie scene, not satire. A real Senate hearing moment that left senators frozen and viewers speechless. And when pressed under oath about that post, the man at the center of it all didn't deny it. He said quietly, "That's me at the top." From that second on, the entire room shifted.
Violent rioters should be pardoned. A Republican colleague said such pardons would be hard to believe, even absurd. Your former colleague J.D. Vance said the violent rioters should not be pardoned. Even Jim Jordan said pardons would, and I quote, focus on all the people who didn't commit any violence. Well, Trump pardoned all of them. And there's a lesson in that. Every time you think Trump would never go that far, rethink that. We all seem to agree that violence against police is unacceptable, yet more than 600 people who physically attacked Capitol Police officers were just put back on the street, part of a 1,500-person personal Trump army, now out there with people who have proven themselves willing to do violence on Trump's call. In only 10 days, some are already back committing crimes. We've also tried as a committee, together, to address the dangers of illicit drug sales over the internet, and I assume we're all against murder for hire. But Trump also just pardoned a dark web operator sentenced to life in prison for trafficking illegal drugs online and accused of soliciting murders for hire. Those pardons, as Mr. Patel has said, are a mistake, but they are also a signal that we are entering a strange and dangerous time. That is the context for today's hearing. Warnings that the FBI could become Trump's enforcer, use the powers of law enforcement to stifle speech and dissent, punish political rivals of either party, and hand out free passes, get out of jail free cards to violent supporters are warnings we should heed. Here are some warnings of this nominee's Trump administration colleagues. Former Attorney General Bill Barr said, "This nominee has virtually no experience that would qualify him to serve at the highest level of the world's preeminent law enforcement agency," end quote, "and we would never be able to command the respect necessary to run the day-to-day operations of the Bureau." That's for the deputy position. Former CIA Director Gina Haspel was reported threatening to resign rather than have this nominee serve under her. John Bolton, Trump's former national security advisor, said, "I didn't think he was qualified. I was forced to hire him." Trump's deputy national security advisor, the nominee's former supervisor, said, "His ideas are ludicrous. He's absolutely unqualified for this job. He's untrustworthy. And it's an absolute disgrace to even consider an individual of this nature." That's from Republican appointees who worked with him. And here's what this nominee himself has said about using his office to prosecute journalists. "We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. We're gonna come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly." Is that a correct quotation, Mr. Patel?
Senator, that's a partial quotation,
But it's correct.
in part.
Regarding his publication of his enemies list, Mr. Patel proclaimed, "The manhunt starts tomorrow," and reposted a video depicting him taking a chainsaw to his political enemies. Is that you, Kash Patel, reposting that at the top of that page?
Senator, I had nothing to do with the creation of that meme.
Is that you reposting it, was my question.
And that's me At the top.
You said FBI agents were responsible for the violence on January 6th, and I quote you here, beyond a reasonable doubt. Is that what you said?
That's completely incorrect, and I appreciate the opportunity to address that.
I'll give you an opportunity in writing, but this is my time now.
Have at it.
An Inspector Attorney General investigation found that that was false. And you said we should impeach judges who rule against Donald Trump, who are, in your words, political terrorists. When this nominee tries to explain all this away, keep one thing in mind. He's testified under oath before a Colorado judge who presided over a Trump case in which he was a witness, and the judge found, and I'm quoting here, he was not a credible witness. His testimony is not only illogical, but completely devoid of any evidence in the record. That's from a judge. This is a dangerous time, and I ask all my colleagues to consider whether these plain comments by this person and by his own Trump administration colleagues should be given a blind eye, just overlooked, or whether, like the warnings of pardoning violent January 6 offenders, they're warnings to be heeded. There is an unfathomable difference between a seeming facade being constructed around this nominee here today and what he has actually done and said in real life when left to his own devices.
What began as a routine confirmation hearing turned into something far more explosive, a live test of how far loyalty can bend before it breaks the rule of law. The senators weren't just questioning a nominee, they were questioning the direction of the country itself. And what unfolded next exposed not only one man's contradictions but the deeper danger of what happens when partisan allegiance replaces professional duty. It started with a simple reminder of where the nation had been not long ago: hallways filled with chaos, police lines overwhelmed, armed SWAT teams clearing chambers while lawmakers fled for their lives. Everyone in that room remembered the fear, the panic, the disbelief. Yet the same voices now calling for forgiveness for those who turned violent once swore they'd never condone it. Names were read aloud, quotes repeated word for word from colleagues who once condemned the violence and now defend those responsible for it. The senator's tone hardened as he spoke. Hundreds of people who attacked officers now walking free, pardoned in the name of political loyalty, some already rearrested within days. And hovering behind it all, the same nominee sitting before them, the one who had called those pardons a mistake, but who now seemed ready to justify them anyway. The message was clear: this wasn't about justice anymore, it was about allegiance. And that was only the beginning. What truly rattled the hearing was the list, an enemy's list as some described it, published publicly and followed by that chilling declaration: the manhunt starts tomorrow. The imagery was unmistakable. It wasn't rhetoric about ideas, it was a promise of vengeance. When asked directly if he'd reposted it, the nominee hesitated, but the evidence was right there on the screen. "Is that you at the top?" the senator demanded. A pause. "That's me at the top," came the answer. In that instant, any illusion of calm professionalism shattered. The chamber murmured. The nominee's defenders shifted uncomfortably. And for millions watching later, one question echoed: how can someone who publicly glorified a manhunt be trusted to lead an agency built to protect citizens, not pursue them? But the senator wasn't finished. He moved methodically, piece by piece, through a record that read like a roadmap of warning signs. Former high-ranking officials, people from the same administration the nominee once served, had already sounded alarms. The former attorney general called him unqualified. A CIA director reportedly threatened to resign rather than serve beneath him. A national security advisor labeled his ideas ludicrous. These weren't political enemies, they were colleagues who had seen him up close. Still the senator pressed on, quoting the nominee's own words about how he'd use his position to find conspirators in the media. He'd said, "We're going to come after you whether it's criminally or civilly." For a man seeking control of an investigative bureau, that line landed like a thunderclap. A threat against journalists isn't just bad optics, it's an attack on accountability itself. Because when reporters and whistleblowers fear retaliation, the truth disappears into silence. And that was the heart of the senator's warning. He wasn't just questioning competence, he was describing a pattern: vengefulness, grandiosity, and a fixation on enemies real or imagined. When he spoke about history, you could feel the tension rise. He drew comparisons to regimes where loyalty replaced law, where security chiefs became extensions of personal power rather than guardians of justice. The lesson was plain: it never starts with mass arrests or open repression, it starts with one man promising a manhunt. The senator's next move was devastating. He reminded everyone that a Colorado judge, an impartial arbiter, not a rival politician, had already ruled on the nominee's credibility. After hearing his sworn testimony, the judge wrote that it was illogical and devoid of evidence, in plain English, not believable. That finding wasn't an opinion piece. It was a legal conclusion preserved in court records. For any nominee it would be damaging. For someone seeking to lead a national investigative agency it was disqualifying. And yet here he was, facing questions not only about his words but about the truthfulness of his sworn statements. Conduct shows character, the senator warned. And history shows where this pattern leads. It wasn't theater anymore, it was an alarm bell. What made the moment resonate was how familiar it felt. The erosion of trust doesn't happen overnight. It happens when institutions are asked to bend just a little for the sake of power, when agencies built on impartiality are pulled into the orbit of politics, when investigations become tools of revenge instead of instruments of justice. The senator painted that picture vividly, of career agents silenced, morale collapsing, citizens losing faith. He described how regimes slide toward authoritarian habits not through sudden coups but through slow corrosion, favoritism, intimidation, selective prosecutions, and fear. In that sense, this hearing wasn't just about one nominee. It was about whether the system still had the courage to say no before it was too late. The chilling part came when he explained the practical consequences. A politicized bureau doesn't just harm its reputation, it endangers lives. It discourages whistleblowers, undermines journalists, and emboldens those who believe loyalty can shield them from consequences. When powerful people talk casually about coming after reporters, it sends a message: truth is negotiable, and dissent has a price. That's how transparency dies, one threat at a time. By now even the nominee's own responses couldn't change the trajectory. His denials sounded rehearsed, his tone defensive. Every "I appreciate the opportunity to clarify" only reminded listeners how deep the doubts ran. And as the senator continued, connecting the dots from pardons to posts to public threats, it became clear this wasn't a simple confirmation hearing. It was a reckoning. He spoke directly to the public watching beyond the chamber. He urged them to remember that law enforcement power is unlike any other. It can open investigations, issue warrants, seize property, and change lives forever. And those powers only remain legitimate when people believe they're used impartially. Once that trust is gone, justice becomes just another word. The senator then outlined what must come next: not outrage but oversight. Strengthen inspectors general, protect whistleblowers, demand transparency from those who wield power. Because the moment oversight becomes optional, accountability disappears. He didn't need to name names. The point was universal. Institutions survive not by loyalty to leaders but by loyalty to the law. It was a rare hearing where the stakes felt immediate, not abstract. The questions weren't about policy, they were about principle. Can someone who jokes about manhunts, reposts violent imagery, and threatens journalists ever be trusted to uphold justice without bias? The senator's answer was clear: no, and his closing words carried the weight of warning. He reminded his colleagues that history is full of moments when people looked the other way, convincing themselves it wasn't that serious. But by the time the consequences became undeniable, it was too late. His message was simple this time: don't look away. What struck many was how he closed the loop, turning from the nominee to the audience itself. He urged citizens to demand the truth, to ask their representatives for records, to support organizations defending institutional independence. It wasn't a partisan call, it was a civic one. Because the story unfolding in that hearing wasn't about politics, it was about power. about what happens when those meant to enforce the law start believing they are above it, about how easily professional duty can be replaced by personal loyalty, and about the quiet courage it takes to say, no, not this time. As the cameras clicked off and senators filed out, the echoes of that exchange lingered far beyond the marble walls. Viewers across the country argued, debated, and dissected every moment. Some saw it as overdue accountability, others saw it as political theater. But beneath the noise was a single truth the senator had forced into the light: credibility, once lost, is almost impossible to rebuild. For the bureau he sought to lead, that credibility is everything. Without it, every investigation, every prosecution, every verdict becomes suspect. And once citizens stop believing justice is blind, democracy itself begins to wobble. That's why the warning landed so hard. It wasn't just about one man, but about all the quiet compromises that turn principles into talking points. In the end, the senator's words hung in the air like a challenge. Conduct shows character. The nominee's record spoke for itself. Whether the chamber would listen remained to be seen, but for those watching, the takeaway was undeniable. This was a moment to choose between comfort and conscience. So if you've made it this far, you already understand what's at stake. Institutions don't defend themselves. People do. Every share, every comment, every voice that insists on integrity helps push back against the slow drift toward silence. If you believe in accountability, in truth, in the idea that justice should serve the people, not power, then don't just watch this story. Be part of it. Hit that like button, share this video so more people see what's really happening behind those polished hearings, and subscribe so we can keep uncovering the moments that matter before they're lost to spin and denial, because the only way to keep justice alive is to keep paying attention.